This is something we've been talking about the last few months with you, and including in our new series, Revenge of the Taliban, which you're the first episode on, if you want to go watch that. There's a lot happening right now still when it comes to the Taliban, Afghanistan. We made that documentary series in preparation, knowing new stuff would come out, and I think this is one of those important times that we have to take a look at what's happening, because the UN, as may be expected, as someone who is very familiar with the UN yourself, is proposed paying, was this nearly $6 million to the Taliban? Maybe we need to explain this a little bit.
I've spent 8 years at the UN, and the UN only works when there's U.S. leadership. And we need U.S. leadership now to make clear that the UN and the U.S. and other Western allies have declared that the Taliban is a terrorist organization. Now, that seems pretty basic. It seems like something that we should all be able to agree then that you don't fund terrorists. But because the Taliban is now in charge of the Afghan government, the UN agencies that are in Afghanistan feel compelled to pay the people that need to keep them safe, meaning the Afghanistan government, which is now the Taliban government. And so in essence, what the UN is failing to do is recognize that by paying the government, they're actually paying the very people that could be attacking them. And so this is one of the problems that I've always had at the UN, is that, kind of practical, real world experience doesn't permeate into the UN. It becomes kind of this simplistic, idealistic place where the real world goes out the door. And that's why, we have committees where if you're a human rights abuser, you actually sit on the Human Rights Committee. And that's why the Iranians have been in charge of the Disarmament Committee, and others who abuse women and don't give women equal rights are on the Women's Committee. I mean, this is one of these things that doesn't make sense to the average person, and it certainly didn't make sense to me after being there 8 years, is that the UN does a terrible job of living up to their own standards because they're unwilling to make really basic decisions to say countries are not equal, this country is wrong, and they want everybody to just get along and hug it out.
Another layer to this, which I find somewhat ironic, is that the Interior Ministry, which would be in charge of the security, would be the receiver of these funds. And the chief of the Interior Ministry is under UN sanctions, also under U.S. sanctions and wanted by the FBI. But so the UN would be paid to a government agency who's run by someone sanctioned by them nearly $6 million. Are they going to end up penalizing themselves for their breaking of their own sanctions? It seems like you're in bizarro world with this.
Well, you make too much sense. That's your problem. You're trying to you're trying to make too much sense. But let me make a jump here, and let's remind our listeners and our viewers of two other examples where this is happening around the world. We've got Hezbollah as a part of the government in Lebanon. And there's a big, healthy debate right now of what do we do? Do we fund a government that's in coalition with Hezbollah in Lebanon? I think the answer is no. I think we've got to take a very strong stance on not funding terrorism. But look at the Palestinian Authority, who also has in their coalition government Hamas, which is a terrorist organization. And so the UN funds the Palestinian Authority and they overlook Hamas and they try to work with them. The UN funds the Lebanese government and overlooks the fact that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. And now we see them moving in the same direction when it comes to the Taliban in Afghanistan. I think that the U.S. government needs to be very clear. And it's a tough situation because when you say no money to the Palestinian Authority because you're in a coalition government with terrorists, and you say it to Lebanon and you say it to Afghanistan, you should hold the line, but you should also know that you've got truth and the American way on your side. We should not be funding terrorists. And by the way, there's a federal law that says we're not supposed to do it. So, we're going to urge Congress to actually act.
Yeah, and Rick, it's one of those things where you say, we need to be out there and fighting for this in the American way, but when it feels like the American way isn't being upheld, you have organizations like ours, the ACLJ, who can mobilize a UN task force to go in and see what steps can be made. And I think it's easy for our listeners, and look, for me as well, to be very isolated when it comes to the world and say, okay, we have enough of our problems in America. I don't even have the brain space to handle whether the UN is doling out millions of dollars to the Taliban when we have so much going on here at home. But I think it is important, and maybe you can shed light onto, as someone who, again, has been there, why it's important to have organizations like the ACLJ who have these UN task force, who have people like you who have been there and have worked on these massive issues when the American government sometimes doesn't feel like they're pulling their weight.
Jordan, it's such a good reminder, because I think you can get overwhelmed with all of the problems, and you could chalk it up. And I think it's wrong, but you could chalk it up to say, well, the UN is a mess. We know it's a mess, and let's not engage. And that is absolutely the wrong thing to do. And I'm so thankful that ACLJ has a UN office, has a voice at the UN. I heard them when I was there. I see their power, and I'm so proud now to be a part of it. But the reality is that when you fund the ACLJ, you help fund programs that are sticking up for Western values at the UN. And let me just say, this is so important, and it doesn't just fall on deaf ears. When we raise it at the UN, it has an impact. And so people need to really feel proud that they're a part of the ACLJ, that they're giving to be able to have this voice at the UN, in Europe. I can't say how important it is. We've got to have people who get off the couch, stop complaining, get involved in their world. We no longer live in a society where you just get to listen and say, oh, that's bad or that's good. You have to do something. You have to help us.
Yes, and we appreciate that. Appreciate those words, Rick.
We've had you as a part of this broadcast for the whole year and back into some of 2020. But it's really been impactful for our audience to hear your expertise and analysis on what's going on in the world, especially as we've seen such big issues like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, even the border crisis, China's aggression. I'm curious what your thoughts are, as we're just days away from a new year, what some of the large national security issues and threats that we're going to be facing in the new year that we'll probably be talking to you with for days to come.
Well, first of all, I have to say, Will, that it matters. These issues matter to us domestically. We're not living in a bubble. It's not a world away anymore. It's not like you can say, oh, that's terrible over there, but it doesn't impact me here. It does impact us, whether it's our tax dollars or the fact that we're fighting against a Biden administration that gives voice, that gives aid and comfort to some of these very weak policies that are coming home. And so I would say watch China. The rise of China is a really big issue. Watch what's happening in Ukraine. I've said it on this broadcast before, and I really believe, and it's probably as we go into 2022 going to be a theme, is that the Biden administration's love of consensus, their love of the applause from the crowd, from the Europeans, is a real problem. It's a problem for us in Ukraine, because I'm hearing now from American diplomats in Europe that the Biden policy is stay with Europe, be close to Europe, don't have any light in between our policy on Ukraine. Now, that's a problem, because Europe and in America, we don't share the same threat assessment. We don't share the same criteria when it comes to how to protect our people. Look no further than Iran, the issue. The Europeans are not threatened by Iran. We are. So watch the consensus and the need for applause from Biden.
I think that's a great analysis. We've been talking about that in general, even the applause when he contradicts himself.